All right, we're back. We're in our second session, day 4 of the marathon. So, John, thanks very much for joining us. Looking forward to the presentation you and I tested the other day. I know things are going to go smooth. With that, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Bob. We really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks very much for your leadership organizing this event. This has been fantastic already so far. And thanks to Joanna Popper and HP for sponsoring. Really appreciate this. So I'm John Bruscio. I'm the founder and CEO of Arch Virtual. And we've been creating augmented reality and virtual reality applications for about 7 years now. So we have a great team, very experienced team of developers we're all actually an entirely remote team. So I happen to be located in Madison, Wisconsin, but we operate from locations all over the country. So today I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Acadicus, which is our VR training platform. And we're primarily focused on the skills training space. So it's being used in a variety of different industries. The features are pretty broadly applicable to a lot of different use cases, but today I'll be talking about primarily our medical and healthcare focus. So to understand kind of where we're going with VR training, especially in the context of medical simulation, I just want to take a brief look at where we are today with medical training. And medical training happens right now in nursing, medical schools. A lot of hospitals will have what are called sim labs, so sim centers, and they're able to simulate patient encounters using plastic and rubber mannequins. So kind of like what you see here on this image, this is kind of a typical sim lab setup, and they'll go through and simulate patient encounters in these sim centers. And this is a vitally important part of medical training because it's the closest thing that you'll get to a real world clinical experience before you begin working with human patients. And so in a hospital setting, for example, simulations can be used to rehearse for a rare or unusual conditions that you don't necessarily see every day, but you want to be prepared. You want to be ready for when that happens. And right now, unfortunately, almost all the sim labs are closed down due to coronavirus, but the ones that are open in hospitals, they're being used for training on coronavirus. So personal protective equipment, if they have access to it, they're training on how to prepare and how to work with patients. And they can do that in a safe simulation setting before they do it in reality. So it's a very important method of learning medical simulation is. So it has a couple of different limitations though. So first of all, it's very expensive. So these mannequins can cost, tens of thousands or $100,000 or more in some cases. And the sim centers that they live in are sometimes multi-million-dollar facilities. These are very expensive spaces. And so it's not necessarily very accessible for people. Not everyone can afford a sim lab, especially rural and remote locations or different parts of the world where they just don't have access to this kind of state-of-the-art simulation, even though they would very much benefit and they would have a lot to gain from it. So even if you're fortunate enough to be studying in a school or a medical school a nursing or medical school that has a sim center, it's not like you can just walk in there anytime you want. These are, they're run by technicians. This is very expensive equipment. They're only open during certain designated hours. So you need to be, for the most part, with an instructor. So even in a nursing or medical school that does have access to a sim lab, your time in that lab is probably going to be fairly limited. So they also tend to lack realism. Like these mannequins, at the end of the day, they're plastic and rubber mannequins, and they dress them up and do they're getting more and more realistic. They have wigs that they can wear, and they have new high fidelity mannequins that, the $100,000+ mannequins that can blink their eyes and they can generate tears. And there's a lot of different things that they can do. But at the end of the day, we've interviewed a lot of people in a lot of sim labs all over the country, and the lack of realism is one of the most common frustrations and limitations of simulation. But even in spite of these limitations, this is a vitally important aspect of medical training. The efficacy of this has been validated numerous times. In fact, it's proven to work so well that In some cases, simulation can count toward clinical hours for certification. So this is a tried and true evidence-based learning modality. And that's going to be really important to keep in mind. Like this works. This is the current gold standard for simulating clinical experience. So our mission, something that I'm personally very passionate about, is to think really big and bold about how can we build or extend upon the things that we know work really well in medical simulation, this proven to work in simulation and so effective. How can we bring that into virtual reality technology? And so that, all you would need is a virtual reality headset, and that would become your portal into a virtually limitless world of simulation content. And I believe if we can do that, that we could completely change the game for medical simulation. It would be pretty incredible what we would be able to do there. So, imagine like the possibilities, like if we could massively increase access and open access to anyone who wants it to medical simulation. Again, I'm thinking about these rural and remote locations and parts of the world where they don't have access to sim labs. Maybe they can't afford a multi-million-dollar sim lab, but they might be able to get access to a VR headset. Especially as we look at the cost and the mobility of VR continues to improve, we'll probably reach a point in the future where anyone in the world can engage in highly effective medical simulation, and they can do so anywhere, anytime. So that's pretty incredible to think about the difference that could make all over the world. This could be a game changer, because once we're in virtual reality, we can make things very realistic. We can make very immersive medical environments. The engines that we're using, Unreal and Unity, we use Unity, but they're getting better and better, and we're on a trajectory to have, photorealistic environments. So that can be a major improvement over the current limitations of medical simulation. But we can also animate things. So we're using motion capture to animate patients and different participants in the scene. We can add sound effects, visual effects, any kind of wound or laceration or rare medical conditions. We can simulate anything you can imagine. And ultimately, taking a step back, like, I'm not interested in just simulating simulation, right? I mean, that's the first step. We're going to speak the language of the industry and work within what simulation is doing now. But I want to go beyond that. And I think once if we can open the door to new possibilities that currently are not even possible, like they're not even thinking about it, because once we digitize this modality, this really important modality, we can innovate in a big way digitally. I mean, this is something that I'm very much looking forward to, because in the long run, we're not trying to just make for better simulation. We're trying to improve patient safety. We want to avoid costly and dangerous medical errors. We want to create better outcomes for patients, and we want to do that for everyone, everywhere in the world. So that's ultimately what this is really all about, and something that I'm really focused on. So how do we get there? So we've been, for the past couple of years, we've been busy building the foundation. So kind of behind the scenes, we've been kind of underground, just building the chassis, the technical foundation that we need to support and effectively build this bridge between medical simulation and virtual reality. And so we're taking a slightly different approach than most VR. Like, we're not building an app. Like, we're not just, building an on the rails type, pre-programmed experience that does one thing one way, and it can't be customized, and it takes a team of expert developers a year and a half and hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars to develop. That's kind of the typical VR development pipeline, but we're building a platform instead, because we're interested in the flexibility, customizability. We want this to be extensible and scalable. We don't want to be just limited to a pre-programmed app. And the other important thing to keep in mind is that we're not trying to eliminate or minimize the role of the instructor. This is another trend that we're seeing a lot that I don't necessarily agree with. The simulation or, sort of like artificial intelligence and automation can really minimize and eliminate the role of the instructor. But when we look at what works in medical simulation, the role of the instructor or the educating physician in some cases is really important. Like, you want that instructor and the physician to be involved in the training, because every hospital does things a little bit differently, every region. There's so many differences, and it's such a complex, multifaceted industry. To try to reduce that down to pre-programmed automated experience and leave the instructor out of the equation seems a little bit premature. Not that automation and AI don't eventually become a part of what we're building, it definitely will, but at least in this first version, we're talking about enabling the instructor. We want to provide tools to them to help them make more efficient use of their time, help to reach more students, more places, increase access, lower costs. That's kind of our first focus at this point. So it could be, so probably my architectural background speaking, but like I'm thinking of this like a facility. So we're building a facility, not just an app, it's a space, it's a place. It's a facility that supports the tried and true practice of medical simulation. And within the facility, we have content and then we have features to support that content. So I'll talk about those before we go to QA at the end. But content-wise, we have environments. So we can simulate a broad range of different medical and healthcare environments. Sim labs, they'll typically have one or two, typical environments at the most. But in VR, we already have, we have an exam room, we have an ICU, trauma bays, we have ambulances, hospital rooms, we have a downtown city environment where we're actually staging accidents and EMT training, paramedic training. We can do mass casualty training there. And we have so many more environments on the way. Even in the next few months, we have so much content that's about to be launched in Acadicus. It's very exciting. And we're also adding new patients on a regular basis. Our goal eventually is to represent, every age, race, gender, ethnicity, height, weight, you name it, everything. We want, in virtual reality, there's no reason why we can't represent an increasingly realistic cross-section of the human population. Instead of just kind of a one size fits all, plastic mannequin, we can represent a broad range. And then we have assets. So we have a library of assets. It's pretty expansive. We have hundreds, I think maybe thousands of assets at this point in our inventory that our users can work with. Some of those assets are now interactables. So we call them interactable assets that can be used for training on procedures. So in this case, this is an EKG lead placement training that you can actually interact with the assets. And we have more and more interactables on the way. So like a vitals monitor. So you can actually manipulate the vital signs during a real simulation scenario. We also have multiple choice questions system for assessment and follow-up afterwards. So lots of different interactive assets on the way. But one of the things that I want to mention here is that there's a really interesting network effect that's happening in the content side of Acadicus. So now that we're digital, right? It's not just a single instance of a sim lab in the basement of a hospital somewhere. It's interconnected now. It's part of a networked platform where the schools can start sharing their content and simulations with each other. They can provide open access to content so that it's available to anyone, anywhere. And so there's all this new content coming in and it's all being shared in these schools. We have a number of very exciting partnerships on the horizon that are with schools and institutions that have agreed to share everything that we're building for them to be available publicly to all other users of Acadicus. So this network effect is really profound. In this heart, we have a human heart here. It's a cross-section. It's actually animated, and we have a huge version of it that you can visit in Acadicus. I'll talk more about how you can get to that for free in a little bit, but it's an incredible asset to see all the different parts of the heart moving. But we brought this one asset in, and within a few weeks, it was used in so many different use cases. It's been used for electrophysiology training, cardiac anatomy. We used it in the didactic component of the EKG lead placement training. It's being used to visualize heart blocks for a paramedic program. There's just all these different use cases happening around this one asset. So we're just getting started, but that's pretty exciting to me to think about where that could lead in the future. So the facility, we talked about the content, and now we'll talk about the features that we've developed to support the use of that content. First and foremost is multi-user. This has been important from day one. We've always known that multi-user was going to be important. I just don't imagine VR as being sort of this isolating thing. You go in by yourself and it's just an automatic experience. We want to bring people together in virtual reality. And so it's powerful in a VR lab where you've got people that can access it from the same facility, but it's even better better if you've got multiple campuses or you've got people joining from other parts of the country or other parts of the world. I just met with somebody from Australia the other day, and we're literally on opposite sides of the planet, but we're together in virtual reality looking at equipment and doing medical procedures, and it was just really, really neat to be able to cross that geographic distance. And you can meet with experts and other instructors from other schools. It's just a really great feature to have. And you can, when you interact with things, you can see the other person interacting with them. It's really like you're together in the same space. So that's kind of live training, so live real-time training with multi-user. But we also have the ability to do asynchronous training. So 3D spatial recording is a really powerful feature. It's one of my favorite things in Acadicus that we can do is capturing an instructor's demonstration in 3D. So it's not just a video, it's not just a 360 sphere. This is a real 3D immersive 3D spatial recording. So in this case, we have a physician that's doing a recording. One of our Acadicus technicians will work with you to set up all the scenes and get everything set up. You just hit record and it begins capturing everything you're saying, everything you're doing, and you save it into what we call a holocron object that the students can then come in and press play on that holocron object, and they're able to watch that recording played back. And they don't have to, the instructor doesn't have to be there anymore. Now it can be asynchronous. So this could be any time of the day, anywhere, anytime. You can be in there watching these. You can watch them as many times as you'd like. So you can watch it over and over and over again to really understand the content. And again, so when you do go to the sim lab or you're working with a real patient, you've got deja vu because you've done it over and over in VR. And you can follow along. You can interact with the same assets the instructor's interacting with. It's just a very powerful feature. And in this case, you can see one of the holocrons behind the guy on the left's head. So that's one of the objects that you can press play on and begin the recording. You can also capture multi-user events. So when you do like a simulation scenario or a mock code in Acadicus, you can record that in 3D and then play that back for debriefing and assessment. This is a really important part of medical simulation, is debriefing. To go back and watch the scenario, and you're literally watching yourselves in 3D, and you can move around while you're playing it back to look at, what did you miss? What should you have noticed that the vital signs changed? Should you have done this? Who should have said this? Who should have noticed that? It's a very powerful method of debriefing and assessment. One of the other features we just launched recently that we're just getting started with is called Ghost Mode. So in medical simulation, there's a common practice of having what are called standardized patients. And so these are paid actors in some cases, or the instructor will do this. They'll pretend like they're a patient, so it's kind of role playing. In this case, we've enabled the instructor or a technician to go in and become the patient. They literally can embody the patient, and they can manipulate their animations. They have a dashboard that they can use to change the vital signs in real time. So the students have a very lifelike experience, as if they're interacting with a real patient. It's very immersive and very realistic. And we're just getting started with this dashboard. We've got a ton of new features, animations, different things that you can manipulate in the scene to just make this theatrical kind of immersive experience for students. And then finally, we have a scene editing tool. So you can, you're not stuck with what we give you. You can easily download new content. You can delete assets, import new assets. You can move things around, change the scene, anything you'd like. You save the scene when you're done. And we have content packs that you can download, or you can work with our technicians and we can create the scene for you. So the scene editing tools. So just a couple of final notes before we go to QA. We're focused very much on high fidelity simulation. So we need the graphics card of a PC to render this stuff. We do have a lightweight version that we're building for Oculus Quest, and we're going to keep working in that direction. But for right now, in this version 1 that we're working on, we're really focused on pushing the limits of realism. So we're just getting started. We're going to go much farther than we are now, but so we're focused on PC VR. We've started with the Oculus Rift, so we're compatible with Oculus Rift S, and a Quest if you can link it to a compatible PC. And we're going to be expanding that out to other PC VR platforms. throughout the year. And then we're also going to continue moving forward with the Oculus Quest in mobile version. But I wouldn't look for that anytime soon. Like, we're going to be patient with that, and we're going to first focus on creating highly realistic, high fidelity simulations and push the realism, which is the place we want to start. And then eventually we believe that mobile headsets will eventually be able to support higher and higher quality graphics. And we'll be there front row center when that happens. So our business model is pretty straightforward. It's free to download Acadicus, free to access. There's several free simulations that we opened for this event. So the call to action button will take you to a site. There will be a little form there that you can fill out to download Acadicus. But it's free to download, free to use. And we have a subscription model for institutions or schools that want to have their own private sim lab to work in, or they want to create their own content or their own simulations. So for enterprise or education, they can have a subscription model for a private space that they can work in and commission custom content if they'd like. And then let's see. So we also have the ability for instructors to create simulations and share those. So if you are an instructor and you want to share something that you've created, or you want to create a simulation, you can share that publicly, or you can actually monetize your content and sell it within our simulation library. So if there's anything that you'd like to teach that's a hands-on skill or communication skill, let us know, and we can work with you to create that content and add that to the library. And finally, we're not just medical. Again, I focused on that as the use case here, but we're also supporting a variety of different use cases. This is one of our customers, one of our first customers, LJB. They've been doing a great job focusing on the fall protection space in Acadicus. And so we also have people that have been using it for management skills training, onboarding in workplaces, HR, veterinary training assets. We have industrial HVAC training. We even have a Blackhawk UH-60 helicopter that we brought in. There's a steam turbine for a power utility that we're working on. Almost anything you can imagine, we can bring in there, and you can use that. So again, I mentioned that call to action. If you click on that, send us a note with that form. We'll send you the free installer. And this is the Acadicus Commons, where you'll be able to get to the free simulations that we have available. From a medical perspective, we have like post-intubation desaturation. We have pediatric airway readiness, central venous catheter preparedness. We have the EKG lead placement training, electrophysiology, the heart cardiac anatomy, all kinds of different things that you can go in there and see. We also have a coronavirus info hub. And if there's anything at all that you would like to share, or any experiences that you have that you'd like to share, this is a public access open space that we're sharing. And we'd love to have more content, more information, more models, anything that anybody wants to share in that coronavirus info hub. I believe it's room 1800. And you can, right now there's a Dr. Nick Slayman from DuPont Children's Hospital has created a series of 3D spatial recordings in there that you can go in and watch now. But again, if there's anything you'd like to share, we would love for this to be a useful resource for that. So with that, I'll take questions. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Hey, John, a really great presentation. We had a lot of chat comments that we'll have to kind of scroll through later. All the chat is saved with every event. One question I want to pass along to you, since we only have a couple minutes, is were you looking at any other sectors besides healthcare?
Definitely, yep. Safety training, HR skills training. We have Keith Fuller did some recordings on team communications or management skills training. We're working in HVAC. We're doing a manifold gauge right now for a school for HVAC training. Really, it's pretty limitless. The actual tools are pretty broadly functional across a number of different industries. Creating a 3D spatial recording is pretty useful in a lot of different ways for a lot of different industries, and the multi-user tool. So yeah, definitely beyond medical and healthcare for sure.
Sorry, I'm trying to troubleshoot at the same time. Let's see.
There's questions about the size of your team, the size of your team that's internally.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have an amazing team. I am in awe of these developers. They're just incredibly experienced and knowledgeable. We've got about 5 core people on the team, and then that expands up to 8 to 10, depending on what we're working on and what content we're developing. And we span the whole range. So we have access to things like, motion capture teams. We have animators, modelers, anatomical modelers, hard surface modelers for like the environments. And then we have programmers. We have a great network engineer. We have across the whole spectrum.
John, I think with that, if it's okay, I think we'll end the session. We'll all the questions are going to be saved. We'll scroll through the comments later, and we'll add those to a Q&A list with the video next week.
And
That
John,
sounds good.
what's the best way for people to get in touch with you to follow up?
Yeah, I just want to mention one thing. We actually have tomorrow we're going to have an open house at 8:30 Pacific time, 11:30 Eastern. So if you fill out that form and get the Acadicus installer, I should have mentioned too, it's also accessible in non-VR in a spectator mode. So even if you don't have an Oculus Rift, you can access that. But we'll have an open house tomorrow at 8:30 Pacific, 11:30 Eastern. The website, just acadicus.com.
Okay, is available on Steam now as well?
No, it's just just send us a note and we'll send you the installer.
Okay. All right. So thank you all. And now we're going to do a live poll.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here.
We'll be back in a couple minutes.